The next focus is sources of self. So what I want to do is take a look at socialization, and then these are the components that fall into the ones we're going to look at: our family, school, peers, community or culture, and media. And socialization is how you learn to be you, how you learn how to be within a situation. You'll find out that socialization happens throughout your life. You get socialized into being what it is to be a college student. You get socialized into a new job. When I was working for, when I was being a corporate trainer years ago and I was bringing new hires in, it was part of my job to make sure that they knew the background on the company and they knew how it came into being and what was expected of them when they were answering the phone and what the process was and what happened first, second, third on a phone call. So I was basically socializing them into what it was to be an agent on the phones. So really, when we're looking at this, socialization is every time you go into a new situation, you're getting socialized. A lot of times, a lot of us, I'm probably one of these people that's going to be likely to sit back and kind of watch what's going on before I kind of put myself in the situation. But I have been known to jump in and just sort of put my foot in just to see what was going on. But it really did matter how safe I felt. If I didn't feel safe, probably wasn't going to do that. And then we also look at other influences. So we'll take a look at the major ones that we have going on here. And yeah, there you go. So I'm kind of pulling some of this from Urie Bronfenbrenner. I had learned about Urie years and years ago, and it's kind of a complex model, and it focuses on the microsystem. So if we look at, if we look at the inside circle here, these are where a lot of ours happen. Now, mass media is out here on the outside, but based on today's culture, Bronfenbrenner wrote quite some time ago, and based on the current culture, I think mass media probably falls inside the microsystem with the way that it's functioning. But if you want to have more information about that, you guys could take a look at Mr. Bronfenbrenner out there, but I'm going to kind of go with a simplified model. So the first one that we're going to look at, the first element we're going to look at that's going to be influencing a child is family. It's going to be the first one that they have connection with. It's going to have, they're going to learn how to be with other people. Sometimes that's kind of messed up, so they may not have a good sense about what that looks like, but if we start with family, that's a good place to start. And the book talks about anxiety attachment, so we're going to just briefly mention those. If a child is secure, he's going to have a low attachment and a low avoidance. So he's going to feel pretty comfortable with who he is and be able to interact in the world, feeling confident in his own self. If they're preoccupied, they're going to have high anxiety but low avoidance. So they're going to be really, really nervous, but be able to interact with their family and people around them. Dismissive is low anxiety but high avoidance. So they don't care, pretty much is what that one is. And then high anxiety, high avoidance is going to be someone that's going to be very fearful. So be high on both. Probably someone that's a little bit nervous. Now, if we take a look at school is the next component that kind of falls in here, and you go through kindergarten, and kindergarten has a lot of subtle training. So oftentimes I'll ask my students, you know, who's teaching younger kids in the classroom, and they'll confirm that what they're seeing is they're teaching kids about things like boundaries. They're teaching them how to, oftentimes there's like in class, they might teach them how to brush their teeth or how to interact with other people, keep their hands to themselves. There's a lot of real basic things that are taught. Even, you know, the parents and the family are teaching you things like when you get on the elevator, what are the rules for getting on an elevator? Or how are people supposed to interact? So there's a lot of elements that are going to show up inside of that. How do we get along? How do you get along with other kids? Boundaries we mentioned. They're going to learn about friendships that are outside. Their family might have worked with other people and given them an opportunity to interact with other kids, but school's kind of away from the family and giving them a new opportunity to learn about friendships outside of that. And just it's a new influence. So they've been influenced by their family during their younger years. Now they're going to school, they're getting outside influences. The next one would be peers. And again, this is friendships. This ends up being a little bit more important as you get into the teenage years. You know, there can be a lot of influence there. People can kind of drag people off track, and they don't end up, you know, being as focused as they should be going through life. So peers can have a lot of influence, and you'll hear that a lot. Like, I got mixed up in the wrong crowd and I kind of went down the wrong path. That happens. It happens. And so, you know, you really want to be aware that these are influences that are coming in to kind of work with you. Even, you know, at people's current age, peers can still have a great deal of influence on you. Maybe not the same way that you did when you're a kid, because you're a little bit more developed and can make better decisions for yourself, I think, when you get older, for the most part. But yeah, they're still going to have an influence on you. Culture is another piece. Culture, we talk about shared beliefs, values, nationalities. So I usually call this community, but community and culture kind of go together as far as my mind goes. So the place where you live is going to have a great deal of influence on you. I think about people that grow up in rural areas maybe have a different experience than someone that grows up in the city. So even within, so I'm in Colorado, so even within Colorado, we have rural Colorado and we have those that live in the metropolitan area. And if we talk about that, just that difference between those two, there's a lot of shifts with that. But then you talk about people that come from a totally different culture. That's another component altogether. So we have ethnic differences. And people show their ethnicity. Sometimes they wear something that's different, like a hijab or a specific type of clothing, a headscarf, different things that people wear that show where they're from, because they're proud of that. That's cool. But it does have an influence. It does cause people to respond differently depending on the circumstances. Gender is another interesting one. I think if we looked over the last 40 years or so, there's definitely been a shift in the acceptance of there being not just male and female. When I was younger, it was male and female, and other things were just weird and they would be kind of pushed off to the side. Now there's a lot of acceptance about people that are kind of experiencing things in a different way. And so there's a little bit more open-mindedness about how that looks. So yes, so we talk about too the difference between gender and sexual orientation. So biological gender, a person's sex is what they were born with, and a gender is oftentimes what they choose. So it's important to know, you know, it's just important to recognize the way a person chooses to represent themselves, and just acknowledging that, allowing someone to, however they represent themselves, respect that and treat them in the way that they choose to be treated. I think that's just a kind way to respond to people. There is also physical ability. So if someone has a challenge, a physical challenge, that can cause that to be different, but also there's a culture that sometimes surrounds that. So if you are in part of the deaf community, sometimes that will create that has a different culture. Or if you have military background, sometimes there's sort of a culture that goes around that. If you have, I'm trying to think of what else we have, but there's a lot of different ones. If someone's blind, maybe there might be a culture around that. So there is ideology that happens around somebody's physical ability. And then also age. What I can say is people that are my age, they listen to a certain type of music. It's what we grew up with. we have a fondness for usually what you kind of grew up with between the ages of 10 and 25-ish. You kind of get locked in a little bit on that kind of music. At least that's been my experience. So I really love music from my generation. And if it plays and there's people around me that have the same knowledge growing up, they're going to have the same relationship with music that I do. So the younger kids that are growing up now, they're going to have a certain type of music they're going to be able to relate to growing up. Now, media is, again, that's the one I added last, and I think it does give this idea of what we're supposed to try to achieve, who the ideal self is supposed to be, and sometimes those standards aren't something that people can achieve. So what can we determine that's going to be workable? What's acceptable? What's going to be functional in our lives? And how can we apply those ideas? So I think media is important here in creating those elements, but also there's a lot of other things that go on, like fear and those elements that sort of create a different kind of experience about how people see themselves. So there you go. I hope that helps. That's going back through socialization and how a person learns to be who they are.